we have 6 fasts in the Jewish year. One of them is from the Torah, which is Yom Kippur, and the other 5 are rabbinic. What's unusual about the other 5 is that despite the fact that they're rabbinic, they all have a basis in the Tanakh, in the Bible, which is very, very interesting. For instance, we shalom, shalom. For instance, we have 5 fasts, as I said. 4 of them have to do with Jerusalem, and one of them has to do with Megillat Esther, which is, of course, the fast of Esther, which we do the day before Purim. Now, the fast of Esther is very different than the 4 in Jerusalem. It's not about mourning, M-O-U. It's teshuvah, like Yom Kippur. It's an act of penitence before Purim, based on the story in Megillat Esther, where Esther asked the Jewish people to fast 3 days before she goes to the king as an act of penitence. So, but it's actually, so even though the fast of Esther is not mentioned in the Bible, but the story is mentioned in the Bible, and the idea that Esther fasted is mentioned in the Bible. Now, the interesting thing about the 4 fasts over Jerusalem is that not only are the 4 times mentioned in the Bible, but the idea that they fasted is mentioned in the Bible. So even though we call it rabbinic, because it's not in the 5 books of Moses, but it is in the prophets, which is an interesting. Jonathan, Stephanie, Ruthie, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. We just started. So.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. So again, we have 6 fast days in the Jewish year. One of them is from the Torah, Yom Kippur, that's well known. We all know about that. And it's not about mourning, it's about penitence. Actually, Yom Kippur is considered one of the holidays. It's Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a Sabbath of the holidays. And that's why Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to say Tachanun. We don't say Avinu Malkeinu because it is a holiday. Okay? Why? Because it's not an act of mourning, it's an act of taking stock. It's a solemn day. We want to have teshuvah. But we believe that when we ask God for penitence, then God gives teshuvah when we're sincere, and that's happiness. When you have a judge who you know is 100% fair and understands all the circumstances of everything you went through, and you are sincere, then you know that judge is going to see you through, right? Because they don't need the witnesses. They know exactly what you're about to say. So in that sense, standing in judgment before a judge who is totally just and totally fair can be an act of happiness. Anyhow, so that's Yom Kippur. But the other 5 are rabbinic. And as I said before, they're rabbinic, but all 5 have some mentioning in the Bible, in the Tanakh. Even the fast of Esther, which is also not about mourning, but like Yom Kippur, an act of penitence, is not mentioned as a fast day in the Tanakh, but it is mentioned that Esther asked the Jewish people to fast for 3 days before she went to get the king, to see the king. So it's obviously that if they enacted such a fast day, it has a source in the fact that Esther and the Jewish people fasted. But what about the 4 fast days of Jerusalem? All of them are actually mentioned in the Bible, and they're mentioned as fast days in the Bible, not in the 5 books of the Torah, and that's why they're not considered from the Torah, but definitely in the Tanakh. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so let's look now at the sources. I have them in Hebrew and in English. We'll look at the English, obviously. Right here. The 4 fasts over Jerusalem. Now, first of all, what are they based on, the 4 fasts? Why would there be 4 fasts in Jerusalem? We can see from Kings 2, chapter 25, that these specific times are actually mentioned and singled out by the Bible as being significant times or significant steps and milestones on the way to the destruction of Jerusalem. So, Kings 2:25. In the 9th year of his reign, by the way, we're talking about the king Tzidkiyahu, the last king of Judea. So when it says his reign, it's referring to Tzidkiyahu. On the 10th day of the 10th month, As you might remember, the 10th month in the Torah is, when would that be? The 10th month? What do we call it? You can unmute if you want, feel free.
Is it Adar?
No, the 10th month we count from Nisan. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet. So you start from Nisan always, because Nisan is called HaChodesh Aseh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. This month is the first, so Tevet is the 10th. So the 10th day of the 10th month is Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, which we keep as a fast day. Nebuchadnezzar moved against Jerusalem with his whole army. This is in 586 before the Common Era. He besieged the city, built towers against it in order to jump over it if necessary. And the city continued in a state of siege until the 11th year of Tzidkiyahu for 2 years. So he starts a 2-year siege, which starts on the 10th day of Tevet, and that's considered a very significant time. And then by the 9th day of the 4th month, and I'm assuming that it could be the same year, it could be the 2 years later, it's not clear. But by the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine became acute because there's a siege and nothing can go in and out. So even though it's interesting, are we talking about 2 years later? I won't go into that question, but on the 9th day of the 4th month, we're talking from the 10th month all the way to the 4th month. The famine became acute in the city. Now, what's the 4th month? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Now, today we commemorate the 17th of Tammuz as a fast day, and here it says the 9th. The famine became acute in the city. There was no food left for the common people, and the wall of the city was breached. Our fast day of Shiva Asar Tammuz is a fast day over the breaching of the wall of the city. But here it says the 9th. We'll come back to this. Paragraph 3, on the 7th day of the 5th month, what's the 5th month? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, the month of Av. On the 7th day of Av, which was the 19th year of the king Nebuchadnezzar, then the chief of the guards, Nebuzaradan, came to Jerusalem and he burned the house of God, the temple, and the king's palace, and the houses of Jerusalem, and he burned down the house of every notable person, etc., etc. And then after that, he captures the king, and meaning Tzidkiyahu. I think it's mentioned right here. Oh, I jumped over that, but in the second part. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon put Gedaliah, the son of Achikam, the son of Shaphan, in charge of the people. So after Jerusalem is destroyed, according to this, on the, I think it says, on the 7th day of Av, then he puts Gedaliah, the son of Achikam, in charge of the Jews, the commoners who were left over in the land of Judea. When the officers of the troops and their men heard that the king of Babylon had put Gedaliah in charge, they came to Gedaliah at Mitzpah, together with Ishmael, the son of Netaniah, and Yochanan, the son of Koreach, etc. And Gedaliah reassured them and said to them, don't be afraid to serve the Chaldeans who work with the Babylonians. Stay in the land and serve the king of Babylon. It will be well with you. But in the 7th month, that's again, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei, meaning in the 7th month in Tishrei, and today we commemorate Tzom Gedaliah, the 3rd of Tishrei, Ishmael, the son of Netaniah, who was of royal descent, came with 10 men, and they struck down Gedaliah, and he died. And they also killed Judeans and Chaldeans who were present with him at Mitzpah. So here we have it in Kings 2. The story of the 4 days which become our 4 fast days. King 2:25, the 10th of Tevet, which we commemorate, the 9th of Tammuz, where we commemorate the 17th, the 7th of Av, where we commemorate the 9th, and here it doesn't give us the day, it only says in the month of Tishrei that Gedaliah was killed, and we commemorate the 3rd. What does this mean? So let's look at an alternate source. In Jeremiah 52, we'll see an alternate source. And in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day, again, the 9th year of the reign of Tzidkiyahu, the last king of Judea, on the 10th day of the 10th month, which is the 10th of Tevet, King Nebuchadnezzar moved against Jerusalem with his whole army, and he besieged it and built towers against it all around. Okay, that's identical to Kings 2:25. Asara b'Tevet, we have two sources which indicate the same thing. And then on the 9th day of the 4th month, which is the 9th of Tammuz. So before we had also the 9th of Tammuz. So we have two sources that say the 9th of Tammuz. Why do we do the 17th? I'll get to that. The famine became acute in the city. There was no food left for the common people, and the walls of the city were breached. Okay, and then I keep going, and they killed Tzidkiyahu. And then on the 10th day of the 5th month, this is interesting, the 10th of Av. So if you remember in Kings, it said the 7th of Av. And here it says the 10th of Av. So what's going on? There's a discrepancy between what it says in Kings and what it says in Jeremiah. So for this, the Talmud steps in and says, look, it says the 7th, it says the 10th. Jerusalem didn't burn in one day. So the Talmud basically said they set the fires on the 7th. By the 10th, the temple was destroyed. We commemorate the 9th, but the temple was actually destroyed the 9th and the 10th. By the way, we have the 10th is mentioned right here, the 10th of the 5th month. You know that our minhag is that even tonight, when Tisha B'Av is over, we continue the laws of mourning, not to have meat and not to have wine and not to cut our hair until tomorrow at 12 o'clock midday. Because the Talmud says the truth is that the temple burnt into the 10th. So we do at least midday, a little bit of mourning too. And miksat hayom kechulo, part of it, a day is like the whole day. And so that's our custom into the midday of the 10th. So the Talmud basically says, and that makes a lot of sense if you have these two sources, that basically Jerusalem burned from the 10th, from the 7th to the 10th. And here it's mentioned the 7th in another place, and here it's mentioned the 10th, from the 7th to the 10th. We commemorated right at the end on the 9th, and we partially commemorated on the 10th. Well, and some good, and the killing of Gedaliah is also mentioned here, but I didn't put it in because it wouldn't fit. So, but we have another discrepancy. The other discrepancy is both places say that on the 9th of Tammuz, that's when the walls of Jerusalem were broken. And we commemorate on the 17th. Now, the Talmud actually says something very interesting here. The Talmud says, yes, we commemorate the 17th of Tammuz. That has nothing to do with the first temple. That's the second temple. Talmud says that on the second temple, the walls were breached by the Romans on the 17th day of Tammuz. And they preferred to make the fast day on the 17th of Tammuz, which in a moment I'll try to explain, if you remind me, why that's also significant. That is specifically the second temple, Shiva Sabra Tammuz. By the way, there's a mission that says 5 things happen on Shiva Sabra Tammuz. One of them is that the walls were breached, and we know it means the second temple. And the other one, of course, that Moses broke the tablets on the 17th of Tammuz when he saw the Jews celebrating with the golden calf. And there are 3 other things: a certain general who destroyed the Torah, and another person who put a tselem, an idol, in the temple, etc. So 5 things happened on Shiva Sabra Tammuz. So it could be that they wanted Shiva Sabra Tammuz because the tablets were broken on Shiva Sabra Tammuz, but it's also possible that it's only about the second temple. So it's interesting that the first temple happened very similar. It was on the 7th, on the 9th, excuse me, but on the 17th, that's what's in the second temple period. So we have 4 days, and which could be fast days. In the first temple, obviously, if they made it to a fast day, it wouldn't have been the 17th of Tammuz then. It would have been the 9th, like these 2 sources say. But did they fast? The interesting thing is, we actually have a source that says yes, right over here. Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19. Now, as you probably know, Zechariah was one of the 3 prophets who lived into the second temple period. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi are the three surviving prophets from the Second Temple, from the Babylonian exile, who merit to see the building of the Second Temple. Haggai talks a lot about the building of the temple, and he actually talks to the Kohanim to see if they know what to do. Zechariah too. So let's just read Zechariah. Now the people came to Zechariah, and they said to him, wait a second, do we still have to fast? The temple was just built. But from the fact that they asked that question, it's obvious they fasted during the Babylonian exile 4 fasts over Jerusalem. And it's obvious also from Zechariah's answer. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, the 4th month is Tammuz, the fast of the 5th month, Av, the fast of the 7th month, Tishrei, what we call Tzom Gedalia, and the fast of the 10th month, Asara B'Tevet, shall become occasions for joy and gladness, happy festivals for the house of Judah, and you must love honesty and integrity. So from Zechariah, we learn 2 things. Number 1, we learned that they fasted during the Babylonian exile, meaning right after the destruction of the first temple, within a short period of time, Jews were fasting 4 fast days. In Av, in Tammuz, in Tevet, and in Tishrei. We can guess what the dates are within those months, but it's not clear. Meaning it's not clear from this verse. But for sure there were 4 fast days. And the second thing is clear is that they fasted on those 4 fast days in the Babylonian exile. And the next thing is clear is that the Zechariah says to them that now that the temple will be built, you do not have to fast on those four fast days. He says they are days of joy, gladness, and festivals for the house of Judea. There you are. It's pretty clear that obviously during the Second Temple period, they did not fast those 4 fast days. So then, why do we? I think the answer is obvious. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbis must have reinstituted the 4 fast days. Once they reinstituted, why fast on the 9th of Tammuz? Why not fast on the 17th of Tammuz when the Romans breached the wall? That's why it's significant that we fast on the 17th of Tammuz, because we're really fasting on what happened the second time on the 17th of Tammuz, and it also lines up with the breaking of the tablets. So, because this is a reenactment of an old prophetic enactment which happened during the Babylonian exile. It's interesting, the commentaries, the Halakhic commentaries say, why would the people ask Zechariah? He's not a rabbi, he's a prophet. These are Halakhic questions you're supposed to ask rabbis. But basically, and this is based on the Talmud, they say basically this was an enactment done by prophets. That's why they asked a prophet. The Talmud also says that this was an enactment of the prophets to have 4 fast days, based on those four milestones in the destruction of Jerusalem. And it was a temporary enactment because it was basically canceled during the Second Temple period. And obviously the rabbis reinstated it with the destruction of the Second Temple, which actually makes a lot of sense. But then the next question is, wait, if the rabbis reinstated it, they reinstated it probably as a temporary act. So when is the turning point? Is it the same turning point as in the Second Temple, meaning with the building of the temple? So here's an interesting discussion, the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah. The Talmud in Rosh Hashanah, 18b. This is a discussion taking place, of course, in Babylonia. As Rav Chana Bar Bizna said, that Rabbi Shimon Chasida said, meaning one and the name of the other. What is the meaning of what is written in Zechariah? Thus says the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, and the fast of the 5th month, and the fast of the 7th month, Tzom Gedalia, and the fast of the 10th month shall become times of joy and gladness to the house of Judea. Meaning, the verse calls it days of fast, and they call it days of joy. How so? So the Talmud says, when there is peace in the world, they will be times of joy and gladness. I'm going to knock this out because this is just, this statement is actually from the commentator. So I want to take that out. Not from the Talmud. I took it from a source where there's also commentary. But where there's no peace, there are days of fasting. In other words, if there's peace, Jews come back to Israel, temple's built, so obviously it's joy and gladness. If there's no peace, and you have Jews in the diaspora, and even worse, they're being persecuted, of course there are days of fasting. So, in other words, for the Talmud, it's obvious. If everything is good, like in the Second Temple, the Jews are coming back to the land of Israel, and they're in charge, and they built the temple, so for sure there's no fast days, just like Zechariah said. However, if the Jews are in the diaspora, and even worse, they're being persecuted, then for sure there are those fast days. Now, the next question the Talmud is going to ask is, what do you do if it's not this extreme and not that extreme, but in the middle? Then what happens? Rav Papa said, this is what it's saying. When there's peace in the world and the temple is, okay, he's writing where the temple is standing, but we're going to understand in a moment that that's actually a controversy. But I'll just leave it here. So these days will be times of joy and gladness. But when there's persecution and troubles for the Jewish people and they're in the diaspora, then these are days of fasting. But when there's no persecution, but no peace, if they wish, they can fast. If they wish, they don't have to fast. Meaning, you took the two extremities. You said persecution in the exile or the temple built in the land of Israel. But what about in the middle? Let's say they're in the exile, but there's no persecution. Take, for instance, the Jews in Spain in the 13th century. Okay, maybe 13th is not as good. Let's take the 14th century. 14th century, well before the persecutions that happened later on in Spain, Jews were actually okay in Spain. They were living in diaspora peacefully. They were having okay jobs and good positions in government and whatever they were doing. There were good times in Spain. I'm saying this specifically because we're going to see a source from Spain soon. That's why I'm saying this particular time. Obviously, there are other times in Jewish history, maybe even today, right? There are many countries that Jews were not persecuted when they were in the exile. Okay, things change over history, but so Rav Papa says, if you're in the exile, but there's no persecution, then the people can decide. If they wish, they fast, and if they wish, they don't fast. It's your own decision. By the way, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, in Taf Kuf Nun, or Achaim 550, so Joseph Caro, in the fourth Siman, in the fourth paragraph of 550, says like this. Says, concerning these fast days, and we'll see in a moment, he's only talking about 3 out of 4. Tisha B'Av they see is a little bit different, and in a moment we'll see that the Talmud also sees Tisha B'Av a little differently. But the Joseph Caro says, before every fast day, Asara B'Tammuz, Asara B'Tevet, the 17th of Tammuz, Tzom Gedalia, the community has to decree a few days before the fast that there's going to be a fast. Because if they don't decree, it's not clear that the fast is binding. Because it says, if they're in time which is not persecution, they have to decide. So therefore, they should make a decree and say that, yes, we have the fast. However, in that same Siman, the Rama, Moshe Isserlich, the Ashkenazic authority, says, no, we don't do that. Every year, it's annual. We don't have to make proclamations. We are very aware that these fasts go from year to year. But the opinion of Joseph Caro was that it's not clear, because the Talmud says if they want, if they don't want, so they have to make it clear that they want. The Rama says it's not necessary. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara says, paragraph 3, if so, if you're saying it depends on the will of the people, then even the 9th of Av shall also be like the other fast days. If they want, they want. If they don't, they don't. Rav Papa answered and said, no, the 9th of Av is different. Since the calamities that occurred on that day were multiplied. As the master said on the 9th of Av, the temple was destroyed twice. And even Beitar was captured on the 10th of Av. And the city of Jerusalem was plowed on the 10th of Av. And the Jews were expelled from Spain on the 9th of Av in 1492. And an El plane was shot over Bulgaria in 1956 on the 9th of Av. I mean, it's not been a great day, okay? Let me put it this way. If you're not superstitious, The 9th of Av is a good reason to become superstitious about what's going on with the Jewish people. It's like not a great day. You know the story of the LL plane shot over Bulgaria. And the Bulgarians, of course, said it was a mistake, and they thought it was a military plane. They didn't realize it was a civilian plane, and et cetera, et cetera. The Russians actually, turns out, pushed them to do it because they were under communist, the Warsaw Pact countries. And there was a book written within the last decade. I forget the name of the book, but I heard the interview by the guy who wrote the book, who claimed that it was on purpose. There was somebody on that plane who the Russians wanted for spying against Russia for whatever reason, and they didn't mind knocking down the whole plane for that one person. Okay, but that's another discussion. The point is, lots of things happen on the 9th of Av, and because of that, Rav Papa, writing in the Babylonian Empire, says already we realize this day is not a great day. So we have to exempt the 9th of Av. That should be a fast day, but the other three, it still applies. Okay, the Talmud continues, 4th paragraph, and it was stated, the sages disagreed about the matter. Rav and Rav Chanina said, Megillat Tanit has been nullified. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say Megillat Tanit has not been nullified. And Rav Chanina said Megillat Tanit hasn't been nullified. I skipped a little bit here, but let me explain what that means. Megillat Tanit was a book which seems to be put together under the Hasmonean dynasty. That's the Second Temple period, probably in the 2nd century before the Common Era. That's the speculation that when the Megillat Tanit was put together. Megillat Tanit is mentioned by the Talmud. In fact, the Talmud quotes Megillat Tanit in the Tractate of Shabbat when it introduces Chanukah on page 21 in Masechet Shabbat. It quotes Megillat Tanit and says, "My Chanukah, what's Chanukah?" What is Megillat Tanit? Megillat Tanit is a collection of all the civil holidays of the Second Temple period. Every country has civil holidays, right? You have, most countries have an Independence Day. Most countries have a Soldiers' Memorial Day and other things. United States and Canada have a Thanksgiving Day in addition. Different countries. Romania has a Children's Day. Other countries have a Parents' Day, a Woman's Day, Father's Day, right? There are different days. And the ones which are more important, they get everybody off from work. Megillat Tanit is a collection of all the civil holidays of the Second Temple period. There are lots of them. On those holidays, you're not allowed to fast and you're not allowed to eulogize. That means that there are holidays. They don't require anybody to close their work. The question, and why? For instance, I'll give you an example. On the 12th day of Adar, that was the day called Yom Nicanor, the day of Nicanor, when the Nicanor, the general Nicanor, was killed in battle. It became a festive day, a victorious day. It was one of the D-days in the Second Temple period. So the question is, now that we don't have the Second Temple, do we still keep Yom Nicanor? Do we still make it a festive day? It's 2 days before Purim. Those who say that Megillat Tanit was abolished, it's like, what's the point? We don't have Jerusalem. We don't have the temple. You're going to celebrate the fall of Nicanor. If heaven forbid there was no state of Israel, would we actually celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut in Paris? Probably not, right? It would seem la'ag larash. It almost would seem like belittling the situation. So obviously national holidays don't continue after that country is. So Megillat Tanit was abolished, the Talmud said, but except for 2 exceptions, Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah and Purim were kept. Hanukkah and Purim were also probably designated, at least Purim probably was designated before Megillat Tanit, but Hanukkah was not, because the Hanukkah was during the Hasmonean Empire. So the Talmud says because of their importance, they continued, both Hanukkah and Purim. There are also fast days, by the way, mentioned Megillat Tanit, which these fast days were also abolished together with Megillat Tanit. And basically the Talmud takes the opinion Megillat Tanit was abolished except for Hanukkah and Purim. By the way, Hanukkah and Purim, both of them have a message for the diaspora. Purim for sure, because it happened in the diaspora. But even Hanukkah, the idea of the ability to regain your independence is a message for Jews in the diaspora. So, aside from, of course, the flask of light, which represents keeping Jewish culture in the diaspora the way the Talmud, but both of these ideas are important for Jews living in the diaspora. So where does this leave us? Basically, the Talmud says, aside from Tisha B'Av, which we need on a perennial basis because of all the calamities that happen on that day, the other three, it depends. Obviously, if there's Jews in the land of Israel in the temple, for sure, these days will disappear. It's not even clear what Tisha B'Av will, but Asar B'Tevet and Tammuz and Shiva Sabar Tammuz and some Gedalia for sure. What happens in the middle? If you're in the exile, but you're having a relatively okay exile, there's no persecution, you're given rights, so then the community decides. That's what Joseph Caro says, that's why you always have to declare. However, the Ramah says we don't declare, it's in perpetuity unless something happens. But remember, the Shulchan Aruch was also written for the diaspora. So in order to get an answer to the major question which I originally asked, which was, will these fast days stop at any point? Because according to Zechariah, they already stopped once with the building of the second temple. So even if it was reenacted again after the destruction of the second temple, will it stop a second time? For that, I'm going to read you the Tur. The Tur, which was written by Jacob ben Asher, who's called Yaakov Turim, it's considered one of the most important halachic works in the Middle Ages. It is the exact forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Code of Jewish Law. Why do I say exact? Because after Jacob Turim wrote the Tur in the 15th century, in the end of the 15th century, there were three commentaries on the Tur in the 16th century. One of them is called the Beit Yosef, written by Joseph Caro, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. The second one is called Darkei Moshe, written by the Ramah, the second author of the Shulchan Aruch. So obviously this is an exact forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch because the two authors of the Shulchan Aruch wrote commentaries on his book. The third commentary was by Rabbi Yoel Sirkis in his book, The Beit Chadash, who wrote that in Krakow. So, and the Shulchan Aruch is actually built on the exact breakdown of the Tur. The Tur also has 4 parts, Orach Chaim, and Yoredea, and Even De'ezer, and Choshen Mishpat, exactly the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was basically built on the model of the Tur. So, the Tur writes in 550, in Orach Chaim 550, today, where there is no peace and no shmad, there are no evil decrees by foreign governments. If they want, they fast. If they don't fast. In other words, the Torah is really quoting the Talmud and Rosh Hashanah. And what does he mean by today? Where is today geographically? Where did Yaakov Turim live as an Ashkenazic Jewish halachic writer? The answer is in Spain. How did that happen? Because the Torah's father, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, the famous halachic commentator on the Talmud, who wrote a brief summary of the halachot of the Talmud, just like the Rif before him. And he did this at the beginning of the 14th century, the beginning of the 15th century, excuse me. So the Rosh's commentary was really the basis on which Yaakov Turim wrote his Tur, on his father's commentary. However, the Rosh, in the second half of his life, was asked to be the chief rabbi of Spain in Barcelona. I think it was in Barcelona. Why was this? Because if you remember, after the Ramban passed away in 1293, so actually no, it's 14th century. I'm sorry, I should have put this out. After the Ramban leaves in 1263 from Spain because he was kicked out, and Shlomo ben Adret takes his place eventually. But then I guess, I don't know how long Shlomo ben Adret was a rabbi in Spain, but in 1305, the Rosh comes to Spain and was asked to take a rabbinic position. So when the Rosh comes to Spain, he also becomes important halachic authority there. So Yaakov Turim, who was born in Spain, somewhere in the 14th century, so he becomes, so he basically was living in Spain when he wrote the Torah. And the Torah is a forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch. I hope that was clear. I'm sorry I don't have the exact dates worked out, but you can find that in Professor Google. So that when he says today, he means today in Spain, in the 14th century, where things were not so bad for the Jews. So today, where there's no peace and no evil decrees by the government, it's called the foreign government, but it's actually the local government. It's bad translate. If they want, they fast, and if they want, they don't fast. Now, the Torah says, what does it mean, peace? Because the Talmud says when there's peace, you don't fast. So he says peace means the temple is not, when no peace is temple destroyed, meaning peace is temple built. That's according to Jacob Turim. Jacob Turim means when the temple is built, definitely these three fasts, aside from Tisha B'Av, will be abolished. Tisha B'Av, I guess, would be more a question. However, interestingly enough, the Beit Yosef, Joseph Caro, in his commentary to the Torah, takes issue with Yaakov Turim, which he doesn't usually do. And he says, no, I disagree. The term peace, which the Talmud is talking about, this is when the non-Jews are not sovereign over Israel. Meaning if there's a Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, that's called peace. Has nothing to do with the temple being built or not being built. Those will be days of joy and gladness. No fasting, no eulogizing, at least on those 3 days which are not Tisha B'Av. Wait a second. According to Beit Yosef, then, theoretically, those fast days shouldn't exist right now. Asar B'Tevet, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, some Gedalia. Tisha B'Av I understand, because the Talmud says a lot of calamities happen, so the Talmud understands it is in a different category. But the three, why are we still fasting? Okay, answer number one, which I think would be obvious, is that there's an argument here. What is the definition of peace? Joseph Caro said the definition is a Jewish sovereignty. Yaakov Turim says the definition is the temple's built. The temple's not built. Now, I did not have this discussion with the local authorities of the Rabbanut here in Israel today, why we are still keeping Asar B'Tevet, but I assume that they are of the understanding of Jacob Turim, and Jacob Turim says that if you have the temple, you don't fast. If you don't have the temple, you do fast. I'm assuming, but again, I have not seen this discussion, because this should have been an early discussion among the, let's say, the first chief rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog, the grandfather of our present president, right? I would wonder, that probably is something that he discussed, because he was quite capable when it came to halakha, so I'm sure he must discuss it somewhere. I actually will look this up because it just occurred to me that he probably does discuss this question. But I'm assuming this is an argument of a definition. What is the definition of peace? Does it mean the temple is built? And does it mean that there's Jewish sovereignty? But then again, you can ask a few other questions too. What is the definition of the temple being built? Does it mean the sacrificial service? I think this is clear that no, and I'll tell you why. The sacrificial service has its own technical problems. Problem number one, without going into the philosophical discussion of Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but because Rambam in his halakha does not have that discussion, the code of his Guide for the Perplexed. He just says the Messiah will build the temple and reinstitute the offerings of the temple. So I'm differentiating between Rambam the philosopher and Rambam the halachist here. However, the question is like this: what does it mean to build a temple without a sacrificial service? Well, for one, we can make the candelabra, the menorah. That should not be a problem, because we know that the service of the temple can be done even when everybody is impure. Because when everybody's impure, then it changes the status of everything. It's called tum'ah hutra b'tzibur. When everybody's impure, then the laws of impurity aren't really enacted in the same way. The Talmud already says that. We could also do the showbread table. We can figure out how to do that. It's not so difficult. The incense altar, even itself, would be a problem because we don't know all the secrets of how the Torah was done, even though we know what the 11 ingredients were. The sacrificial service of the animal offerings would be probably impossible. We need to know the exact place of the altar. And secondly, we need Kohanim who could do this. And we also need the sprinkling of the blood done by the Kohanim. So it's virtually impossible at the moment without Elijah telling us who the real Kohanim were and where the place of the altar was at the time. But we could build the temple. In addition, we could actually build the temple. And according to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, by the way, in his discussions of Halakha of the temple, he claims that there's a mitzvah to have the temple having nothing to do with that sacrificial service. Doesn't King Solomon say, Ki beiti beit tefillah lecho, Isaiah, my house is a house of prayer for all nations. That's not about the sacrificial service. And King Solomon, in his inaugural speech in the temple, he also says, and if somebody comes from a foreign land and they want to pray in the temple, it's open for everybody. So the temple, and Ovadia Yosef says there even is a mitzvah to visit the temple 3 times a year. It's called the Pilgrim Festival, the Pilgrim Mitzvah Riyah, even if there's no sacrifices done, just to be in the temple. He actually claims today there might be a mitzvah, at least rabbinically, just to go to the Kotel even, to see it from afar. So obviously, from the point of view of Ovadia Yosef, if you built the temple, there's reason for it. So that could be the way Jacob Turing understood it. You build the temple, even though Jacob Turing himself knew that there were problems with reenacting the sacrificial service. According to Beit Yosef, you need peace. Now, you could argue we sort of have peace, but on the other hand, do we have total peace? We have this. We're not getting along so much with the Waqf. We have arguments. A Jew can't even pray there. Without going into the political issue, there is a discussion here, but I would say in general, the discussion is like this, because remember, this is not the only place where you have this definition. For instance, in the Shulchan Aruch, right after the laws of Tisha B'Av, there's a discussion about Kriya. Do you have to rent your garments when you see the temple destroyed? Because according to Halakha, you do. And when you see the cities of Judea in destruction, you're supposed to rent your garment, just like we do when a direct relative passes away, or a Jew dies in our vicinity, or a Sefer Torah is burned. And the Shulchan Aruch says that you have to rent your garments, and all the Parshanim, the Ber Hetev and the Mishnah Berurah, probably based on this Beit Yosef, they say the definition of Jerusalem being destroyed is that there's no Jewish sovereignty. So they incorporate this definition of the Beit Yosef, and they say, look, that's the definition. That's why today, by the way, we don't rent our garments when we come to Jerusalem or the cities of Judea, and we don't even do it when we go to the Temple Mount, because the assumption, as Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook once said, the assumption is if we wanted to, we could kick out anybody we wanted. We just don't want to. But there is Jewish sovereignty. The Waqf are there because the government gave them permission to be there. So that's the halachic argument. But I'm just saying that this definition of the Beit Yosef is also used with the laws of Kriya. So why can't it be the same thing with the fast days? So as I said, there are 2 alternative approaches with this. So I'm assuming, without even looking further into it, but it'd be interesting to see what Rabbi Herzog wrote about this, is that probably for this issue, they adopted the standpoint of Yaakov Turim, that it actually has to be the temple standing. Now, here we are on Tisha B'Av, on this discussion. I think that it's really a time to think about, what does it mean? One of the unfortunate things, when it comes to understanding our Jewish tradition, sometimes we are challenged ourselves as Jews. Can we understanding of these things? Unfortunately, there was a poll taken recently among young American Jews in the United States. It was a poll among Democratic supporters. And 20% of the young people, the Jewish young people, didn't really see any point to support the state of Israel, they thought it was an apartheid state. There was an interesting article just in the J-Post by Herb Kanan. He says, what people are not realizing is that this is a major failure of Jewish education in the United States, that Jews don't know that Israel's not an apartheid state because they've never been here. They've never read the history of the state. They don't really know what's going on. That's a lack of education. In Israel, too, we have lack of education in many things. We really don't understand what the temple means. It means a lot of things, but it takes a long time to understand. People mouth prayers without really understanding what they're saying about it. And unfortunately, people also, even before that, there's not always gratitude. This is something I discussed the other day. What do I mean by gratitude? Before we go to the second step, we have to appreciate the first step. We do have Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, but you have to show gratitude. You know, there are many people who live in the land of Israel who don't show gratitude. In the religious Zionist community, the chief rabbis originally instituted Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Ha'atzmaut, by the way, is our civil holiday of independence, which as believing Jews, we don't believe that things happen in the world without God's providence. And therefore we have Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And we have Hallel on Yom Yerushalayim. Because we believe that you have to say thank you when something good happens in our history. Just like in Birkat HaMazon, that fourth blessing over the dead bodies of Beitar, which were given to burial, even something minute as that, a blessing was instituted. So without going to the Halakhic discussion of Halal Yom Ha'atzmaut, and there's a lot of reason for it, but at least there's gratitude and thanks. The Talmud says in Brachot, in Sanhedrin, excuse me, and I'll end here because it's taking longer than I thought, I'm sorry. So the Talmud says in Sanhedrin that when God saved Jerusalem from Sancherib, the king of Assyria, the one who exiled the 10 tribes, and Sancherib made a siege around Jerusalem. That's after 722, but close to about 70, 60 years. No, a little bit less than that. No, it's under Chizkiyahu, so it's not before Chizkiyahu. Again, I'm not good at the dates. But after exiling the 10 tribes, he goes to Hezekiah in Jerusalem. And he makes a siege around, and he camps outside with 185,000 troops. And believe me, Hezekiah is nervous. He doesn't have an army to fight these guys. And he prays to God and he says, you got to help us. And in Book of Kings 2, it says that an angel came and started killing the soldiers of Assyria. And they heard these noises, and they were sure that the Jews, they really were Jews from Judea, called the Egyptians to help them out, and they all ran off. Well, today we know how an angel can kill thousands of soldiers parked out of Jerusalem. Viruses, dysentery, could have been lots of things, right? So today we know all about these things, how an angel of God could have made that happen. But they ran away. And it was a big deal because Jerusalem was saved. And Sancherib called it off. And we have a Haftorah that we read like that. And the Talmud says that when that happened, God wanted to make Hezekiah the Messiah, which means we'll reinstitute everything. The Jews will rebuild the land of Israel, maybe bring back the 10 tribes that ran away. God had to change it. You want to call it a change of heart, even though philosophically that's impossible. And he wanted to make Hezekiah Messiah, the Talmud says. But he couldn't do it. Why? Because Hezekiah lo amar shira. He never sang a song of praise. You have to learn to be grateful. If you're not grateful, it can't give you anything else. Somebody stays at your house for 3 days, they don't even say thank you. You got to learn to be grateful. So God couldn't make Hezekiah Messiah because he wasn't grateful. We got a state of Israel. It's a good thing that there's some Jews who say Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but unfortunately a lot don't. So don't say Hallel. but sing out the praise. You have to be grateful if you want greater things to happen. I always say to my Haredi counterparts, we're not saying Halom Yom Ha'atzmaut. Okay, you're nervous about saying a bracha. Don't say a bracha. Just read the chapters from Tehillim. They're all chapters from Tehillim. That's all they are. Just read them. Show gratitude. Why can't you do that? So if you don't show gratitude, how can you expect the next phase to happen? So it's a good thing there's still some Jews who are showing gratitude. They save the rest of us. And about the temple, there's a lot to understand about the temple. The temple is not about nationalism. Maybe it's also about, but it's not about that. And it's not about extremism. It's about finding a central spiritual point in which the Jewish people and the world at large will merge in our understanding of what life means, what ethic means, and what spirituality means. It's not just for the Jewish people. It's a house for all nations, as Isaiah said, and as King Solomon said when he built that house. And the more we understand that it's a meeting point and not an insular point, and it includes the Islam, it includes the Christians, it includes people, whether of religion or not. When we can understand that and profess that and explain what we're trying to do, in my opinion, the Arab countries will chip in to build it too. But that's my personal belief. Anyhow, we're in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, and we believe that the afternoon is a better time than the evening and the day because it's futuristic. Just as the temple was destroyed on this day, the hope of the Messiah of having a third temple was also instituted on this day, and God willing, it'll happen. And I wish everybody a meaningful rest, the rest of Tisha B'Av to be a meaningful day, and all good things. If there are any questions, bevakasha. Okay, I'll close the